My understanding is that officially the Eco-Dharma residency begins tomorrow. And I only mention that because the talk this evening isn't really focused on Eco-Dharma, except in the sense that, Eco-Dharma still includes an emphasis on our own individual transformation. And that's really what I want to focus on. I don't know if you caught the title, The Refuge of No Refuge. Were people told about that? A nice Zen paradox, right? I think many or most of us are very familiar with this Pali chant, Buddham Saranam Gacchami, Dhammam Saranam Gacchami, Sangham Saranam Gacchami, right? We take refuge in the Buddha, in the Dharma, and in the Sangha. But what does that actually mean? If, as Buddhism emphasizes, the sense of a substantial, self-existing self is a delusion, who is it or what is it that takes refuge? And refuge from what? The whole idea of refuge is a kind of escape, a secure place. One's getting away from something. What is it that we're trying to get away from? The classical answer, of course, is samsara, right? In early Buddhism especially, this big emphasis on samsara, nibbana, samsara, nirvana. Samsara is this world of suffering, this world of craving, delusion. And the ultimate goal in Theravada is nibbana, which, it's interesting, it's not very clear what that means, but clearly it's not about continuing rebirth into this world. But then in the Vimalakirti Sutra, one of the important Mahayana sutras, it says, quote, "The Dharma is not a secure refuge. Those who seek a secure refuge are not interested in the Dharma, but in a secure refuge." For Vimalakirti, the absence of a home, the absence of a ground, the absence of a refuge is itself liberation. In the Prajnaparamita in 8,000 lines, again, another one of the Mahayana sutras, it says, "Without a home, bodhisattvas wander. Dharmas never hold them. The Buddha himself freely wandered without a home. Just so, without a support or basis, without a refuge, that's the position of a bodhisattva." So, is taking refuge an important part of our path, or is it itself the problem? Or maybe both? Early Buddhism, it's very much this duality between samsara and nirvana, but Nagarjuna, perhaps the greatest figure in the whole of the Buddhist tradition after the Buddha himself, if you know anything about him, he famously said, Samsara is nirvana. Actually, he never said that. What he said, though, was that the koti, that's the Sanskrit term, the koti of samsara is not different from the koti of nirvana. Koti means limits, space, but basically he's saying the place that is nirvana is not, it's not a different place from the place that is samsara, right? So it's not about going somewhere else, or we need to interpret that metaphorically. The goal is not to escape this world, but to experience it and ourselves in a different way. The Tibetan teacher Chogyam Trungpa provided what I think is one of the very best descriptions of this way of understanding the path and its fruition and how it is, what's the relationship between our being stuck in this usual understanding of samsara, seeking a refuge, and the goal. He said, enlightenment is like falling out of an airplane. The bad news is there's no parachute. The good news is there's no ground. There's no refuge and no need for a refuge. This is wonderful, but it needs a little unpacking, right? What is the airplane? How do we fall out? What does it mean not to have a parachute? And what does no ground really mean? So let me kind of structure what I have to say around that, to speak a little bit about it, right? What is the airplane that we fall out of? And I think that's pretty clear. Again, that's the world as we usually experience it. The world we live in or think we do. The world as a collection of apparently separate things that occasionally bump into each other in objective space and time. Things that are born or created at a particular time change, maybe quickly or slowly, and eventually pass out of existence, right? Including us, of course. We usually take this way of experiencing for granted as just the way the world really is. But actually, using more modern language, we can describe it as a kind of a collective construct that we are socialized into as we grow up. We learn to see this world, the world this way, because other people see the world this way. And we largely unconsciously buy into that way of understanding as well as experiencing. And like other people in this world, we try to find a refuge within it. But it doesn't work. Mingyur Rinpoche, Tibetan teacher, wrote in an article, Why We Take Refuge. He said, everyone takes refuge in something. Ask yourself, where do I look for happiness? Where do I seek security and comfort? In love? In social status? In the stock market? Not so sure about the stock market lately, right? He goes on to say, we live with a sense of lack that we long to fill. The monkey mind habitually tries to merge with something, particularly another person, parent when we're young, maybe lover, maybe guru, maybe our Zen teacher. in order to alleviate our pervasive sense of insufficiency. Yet samsaric refuges are inherently impermanent, and if we rely on impermanence where none exists in the first place, then feelings of betrayal and anger compound our loss. Before taking refuge in the three jewels, it's helpful to know the refuges you already depend on, because this examination might really inspire you to turn in another direction. What he's pointing to is the fact, again, that this usual way of experiencing the world is something that involves a lot of suffering. It doesn't fully satisfy us because it can't. In addition to the cravings and pains of an easily injured body, we know life here involves, if we're lucky, old age, illness, and eventually death, as highlighted in the mythic story of the Buddha's own life, right? Our self-consciousness means not only do we know that we're alive, but that we know we will not always be alive. And that's a kind of dukkha. As somebody said, there are only two kinds of people. People who are dead and people who will soon be dead. But the most problematical type of dukkha, I think, is not death, fear of death, this idea of something that's going to happen in the future, but something right here and now, that this constructed, uncomfortable, insecure sense of self can never quite become secure. It can't secure itself because there's nothing there that could be secured. As Gertrude Stein might say, there is no there. I mean, our sense of self, it's what? It's composed of mostly habitual ways of thinking and feeling and acting and reacting and remembering and planning and tending. The way these processes, and they're all processes, they're all impermanent. It's the way that they interact and create and reinforce this sense of separation. The sense of a me inside, somewhere, maybe behind the eyes, inside the ears, and all of you and the rest of the world outside. Right? And again, the important point is that this self can never find a satisfactory refuge. That is the airplane that we need to fall out of. How do we fall out of the airplane? That's the second question. Do we jump? Or are we pushed? According to an aphorism sometimes attributed to Shunryu Suzuki, I've heard it also blamed on Trungpa himself, right? Quote, enlightenment is always an accident, but meditation makes us accident prone. Yeah? There's no simple cause effects, right? It's not as though if you, as we know, you meditate for 1,000 hours, it doesn't guarantee anything, right? No simple cause-effect relationship between meditation and enlightenment. And when we meditate, we're letting go of these habitual thought processes, the ones that compose the sense of self. And of course, that involves some effort but awakening happens in its own time. The self can't do it because it's something that happens to the self. According to Yamada Koen Roshi, my teacher, the teacher of Ryoen Roshi, there's no greater service we can do on this earth than to let the ego diminish in zazen, so that the infinite life within us has a chance to take over. Zazen itself doesn't cause that infinite life to take over, but the odds improve considerably. So we need to approach it indirectly. As Dogen says, we need to forget ourselves. But how do we do it? We do it by focusing on something so completely that we become one with it. That's how we let go of ourselves. Such as when we work on a koan, like mu. Right? We repeat mu, mu, mu indefinitely. And as more and more we say it, the sense of a self that is saying something objective, some objective sound, the subjectivity, the objectivity, they merge. The sense of separation tends to disappear. Boldly let go on the edge of the cliff, said Poshan, one of the great Chinese masters. You only revive after death, the ego death. What often happens, though, as we approach that, where we experience that sort of non-separation, where we become with mu, where we become one with mu, that there can be a kind of a contraction. We can tense up. And that, I think, helps us understand those classical Zen stories, right? Where suddenly the Zen master does something abrupt, right? Right? Or pushes somebody down or whatever. A shout or a blow, which can startle us and help us let go. When the student is ripe. Please don't sit around waiting for that to happen. But the third question, why don't we have a parachute? Well, that brings us to the main point about refuges. We attach to parachutes, we seek refuges to keep from plunging into the abyss. The groundlessness that yawns beneath us. Because the sense of self is insecure inherently, it's always trying to identify with something, right? That's how it tries to secure itself or ground itself. And the way I like to express that is that we become preoccupied with what can be called lack projects. Sometimes I call them reality projects because another way to say it is we don't feel real enough. But if we just get enough of this, then we will feel more real, more substantial. These projects take many different forms, right? Many of them are if-onlys. If only I had enough money. If only I were famous enough. And by the way, please, all of you, read my books. Actually, when I talk about money, I don't mean to deny that there are certainly plenty of people for whom they don't have enough money. But I guess in the Zen world, it's more middle class, and that's not usually the fundamental problem, is it? If only I had a car, or a better car, or a partner, or a better partner, or or whatever, huh? If only I were more famous, more intelligent, more powerful, better looking. If only I were sexier. In a commencement address, a wonderful commencement address at Kenyon College, the novelist David Foster Wallace described these. I've been talking about them as the ways we try to fill up our sense of lack or secure ourselves. He talks about them as the things that we worship. Different vocabulary. Let me quote a bit. In the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there's actually no such thing as atheism. No such thing as not worshiping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. And an outstanding reason for choosing some sort of God or something spiritual to worship is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. If you worship money and things, if they are where you tap real meaning in life, then you will never have enough. Never feel you have enough. It's the truth. Worship your own body and beauty and sexual allure, and you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die a million deaths before you actually are buried. On one level, he says, we all know this stuff already. The trick is keeping the truth up front in our daily consciousness. Worship power. You will feel weak and afraid, and you will need ever more power over others to keep the fear at bay. When you read stories about people like Stalin or Mao Zedong. Worship your intellect. This is a good one for retired professors like me. Worship your intellect being seen as smart. You will end up feeling stupid, a fraud, always on the verge of being found out, and so on. I think worship's a great term for these attempted refuges, these lack projects. For in a way, they're kind of, you can understand them as sacred in terms of the role they play in our lives, insofar as they go to the heart of our self-understanding, including the meaning of our lives, right? And of course, they tend to make us narcissistic, right? We are always evaluating everything in terms of what does it mean for me? How does it help me fill up my sense of lack? Unfortunately, they don't work as solutions, because all of the lack projects are really symptoms. They're just symptoms of the deeper problem. We're always seeking some answer outside ourselves. If only I get enough of this or this. But the basic difficulty is that the fundamental problem is inside, this insecure sense of the self that can never secure itself by identifying with anything. A constructed self that never feels real itself, real enough. Another way to say that too is that it involves this particular way of experiencing time. Because insofar as we're caught up in our lack projects, we're preoccupied with the future. We're never here, or we're never satisfied to be here, because here we feel the sense of inadequacy. But in the future, when I'm rich enough, or powerful enough, or famous, then I'll be okay. So we're always planning to live, preparing to live, hoping to live, hoping to feel more real. inside the airplane, though, with everyone else inside the airplane, conditioned by our upbringing, conditioned by the culture, we usually take these lack projects for granted. We don't even really see them. They're just, that's the way things are. That's what it means. That's the meaning of life. That's what's important, right? They're what everyone worships, the refuges everyone is trying to find. Aspects of conventional reality so fundamental to the way society is organized that we normally don't realize there are other options. David Foster Wallace goes on to say, "Look, the insidious thing about these forms of worship is not that they're evil or sinful, it's that they're unconscious. They are the default settings, the kind of worship you just gradually slip into, day after day, getting more and more selective about what you see and how you measure value without being fully aware that that's what you're doing. And the world won't discourage you from operating on these default settings, because the world of men and money and power hums along quite nicely on that fuel of fear and contempt and frustration and craving and the worship of self." David Foster Wallace was not, as far as I know, interested in Buddhism. Actually, I'm not sure about that. But he understood that the alternative to such idols involves awareness and compassion. Again, final quote from him. "Our own present culture has harnessed these forces in ways that have yielded extraordinary wealth and comfort and freedom for some. But of course, there are all different types of freedom, and the kind that is most precious you will not hear much talked about in the great outside world of winning and achieving and displaying. The really important kind of freedom involves attention and awareness and discipline and effort, and being able truly to care about other people and to sacrifice for them over and over in myriad petty little unsexy ways every day." That is real freedom. The alternative, he says, is unconsciousness, the default setting. Did I lose it again? No, there it is. The alternative, unconsciousness, the default setting, the rat race, the constant gnawing sense of having had and lost some infinite thing. One type of worship or lack project that he doesn't talk about so much is attachment to particular people. As I said before, parents when one is young, friends, lovers, and gurus, teachers. The Buddha also talks about the way we can become attached to particular worldviews. This is quite striking. The Buddha said quite a bit about this. In one of the sutras, the Sammaditthi Sutra, he talked about views as one of the 4 types of clinging that we should let go of. The other ones, let go of sensual pleasures, rules and rituals, and belief in the self as something substantial, something real. You will probably remember that wonderful parable of the raft. The Buddha compared his Dharma to a raft that we use to get across the river of samsara to the other shore, nirvana. And then he made the point, well, we don't look at the raft and say, oh, this is a wonderful raft. I'm going to carry it around on my back everywhere I go, right? What an incredible thing for him to say, right? His teachings are just skillful means. They're not sacred. There's something there to help us, to enable us to do something. But we are not to cling even to those teachings. They're a guidebook or a roadmap to help us go somewhere, to help us do something. But this brings us to a real question about the Dharma, about the Buddhism as a path. Does attachment to certain people, teachers, and teachings, the Dharma, does that mean that the Buddhist path is itself a lack project? A way that we try to secure ourselves? Of course. Of course it is. But the point is, it's one that actually can, I emphasize can because it doesn't always happen, right? But it can actually work. It can actually resolve the problem. Not by filling up our sense of lack, although some people try to do it that way, right? But by helping us deconstruct the sense of a self. Right? If the sense of lack is something that shadows the sense of self, if we can deconstruct the sense of self, then we're also letting go of the sense of self. So we can say the Buddhist path is a reality project that actually succeeds. Not by finding a refuge for the insecure sense of self, but by undoing that sense of self, deconstructing it. Ironically, we discover the groundedness we seek by opening up to the groundlessness that we have been fleeing. Earlier I quoted the Chinese master Poshan, who said, "Boldly let go on the edge of the cliff. You only revive after death." An earlier Chan master, Wang Po, said, "Men are afraid to forget their minds, fearing to fall through the void with nothing to stop their fall. They don't know that the void isn't really void, but the realm of the real Dharma." Later on, he elaborated. "Many people are afraid to empty their minds lest they plunge into the void. They don't know that their own mind is the void. That's the true nature of their own mind." So one doesn't really fall, but one lets go. One opens up to what? The important point, though, the void is not a ground, it's a groundlessness. The realm of no thingnessness, no thingness. Where there's no security or insecurity because there's no self that needs to be secured. There's no self that has anything to lose because it's already lost. It's already lost itself. It turns out that the true nature of that self, our own true nature, lacks nothing. And realizing that it lacks nothing, that is itself liberation. We become free to do this, do that. No longer motivated by this obsessive compulsion, right? This tendency to kind of grab onto something. Now it's more of a free, a flowing, a dance. No need to become any particular thing. Koen Yamada Roshi calls this our essential nature. Every one of us, he says, is, quote, one with the whole universe. At the same time, every one of us is extremely poor, for in our essential nature, there is nothing. There is neither subject nor object, nothing to be seen, to be touched, to be handled. Our essential nature has no form, no color, no weight, no place to stay. In a word, our essential nature is totally void, but on the other hand, this voidness has limitless treasures. It can see, it can hear, it can cry, it can laugh, it can run, it can eat. In a word, it's limitless. Emptiness and limitlessness are characteristics of our essential nature, which we realize when we're not trying to find a refuge. One of the greatest of the Chan masters, Rinzai in Japanese, he emphasized the same thing. He said, if you want to be free to be born or to die, to go or stay, as one would put on or take off a garment, then you must understand right now that the person here listening to the Dharma, you, us, has no form, no characteristics, no root, no beginning, no place he abides. There it is again. Yet, that one is vibrantly alive. That's what I call the secret of the matter. We could say the heart of the matter. Another word for refuge is sometimes home. But there's no home for our awareness, for our essential nature. Or maybe we could say everywhere. It's home everywhere. In the Tibetan tradition, Padmasambhava taught the Tibetan king, Trisong Densen, quote, when mind looks into itself, it finds no place from where it arises, remains, or goes to. There's no explanation of this is how it is. Mind has neither inside nor outside. It's experienced as a great original wakefulness without center or edge, an immense all-pervasiveness that is primordially empty and free. This original wakefulness is intrinsic self-existing. It is present within you from the very beginning. Actually, I don't like that way of putting it, right? Present within you, kind of dualistic. Basically, what he's really saying is it's not in us, it's what we are, right? In the consensus reality of the airplane, you and I are just more objects in the objective world, born at a certain time and we pass away sometime later. But as these great masters keep telling us, it turns out that we, like everything else, have always been impermanent manifestations of something, this great formless, nameless, limitless nothing. The ways that this ungraspable no-thingness presences come and go, but not that which assumes these limited forms and names. No place to stay, no place to abide. The separate sense of self cannot ground itself, cannot secure itself. But when we realize our true nature, it turns out that there is no need to do so. Groundlessness turns out to be as much of a ground as we need. The lack of a refuge is as much of a refuge as we need. And of course, this is what Dogen is talking about in that famous phrase, right, from the Genjo Koan, I think the one we all know. To study the Buddha Dharma is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to realize our intimacy with the 10,000 things. Let me end with a more contemporary statement of that by the non-dualist teacher Adyashanti. People familiar with him? Yeah. Long-term Zen student, but he's found his own way of teaching. I think he's kind of summarizes what I'm trying to say in a little poem. And I'll stop at that. Time to cash in your chips. Put your ideas and beliefs on the table. See who has the bigger hand, you or the mystery that pervades you. Time to scrape the mind shit off your shoes. Undo the laces that hold your prison together. And dangle your toes into emptiness. Once you've put everything on the table, once all of your currency is gone, and your pockets are full of air, all you've got left to gamble with is yourself. Go ahead. Climb up onto the velvet top of the highest stakes table. Place yourself as the bet. Look God in the eyes. And finally, for once in your life, lose. Thank you.